on the hoof literally, both in terms of I'm on my feet, actually not literally, I haven't got hooves, I've got feet, but literally in the sense that I am walking, so I'm doing the thing I'm talking about, but also on the hoof, or off the cuff, off the hoof, on the cuff, whatever, you know, I haven't planned this speech. And that's one of the joys of this kind of walking and this kind of talking that I like doing at least, which is the fact that it's off the cuff, on the hoof. I don't know where my steps are going to take me, and I don't know where my words are going to take me. Of course, that's not exactly true, because obviously, look, this is where my steps are taking me right now. This is the salt line again. You who've been on my videos before know where I am. Disused railway line in Cheshire. You see how flat and straight it is. So I know pretty much where my steps are taking me this way. And I know where it comes out. It doesn't come out anywhere, actually. It's an interesting. I don't think this is a rehearsal. It's allowed me to think of other things. This is a railway line, but it doesn't actually lead anywhere. It used to lead this direction to the salt works, I think I've mentioned before. And the purpose of this path, the purpose of this railway line was to get to the salt works and to come back from there. But actually it terminates 300 yards ahead, something like that. And then it just becomes a roundabout and a bit of suburbs. And I have to shoot off down and do something else. But it has this very purposive line, doesn't it? Look at this, you know. And I am doing a little bit of meandering. I am wandering a little bit about as my feet go this way and that, you know. But generally, I'm doing what I'm told, and I am following a long straight track here. The not so old straight track. So its purposiveness, it has a purposiveness built into it. It feels purposive, designed purposively, like those Roman roads, you know, the shortest distance between 2 points being a straight line. It has that kind of purposiveness, not the purposiveness of the wise paths that I've talked about before, which aren't designed in advance, not about straight lines, they're about ease of movement. So desire paths tend to follow the contours of hills, rather than do what motorways or freeways or railway lines or Roman roads do, which just cut straight through them. But it's to do with that, isn't it? The purposiveness of this railway has been, what would the word be if something gets cut the end off something? Truncated? Yeah, the purposiveness has been truncated. So now it's a railway that goes nowhere. We're on a road to nowhere, as David Byrne says. So I do often find myself on this road stopping and looking back, see how far I've come and to see how straight the road is. So it's somewhere, but yeah, I don't know. I was going to say it's somewhere between a meander and a purposive stroll, but it's not really. There's no purpose to this other than to walk my dog. In fact, what I do here is I walk up here past this guy that's running, go the 400 yards to the end of this bit, and then there's a road I can cut down, which leads down to the canal, which you can't see, but it's half a mile away that way, and that goes on for a couple of miles over there, and then I can take some paths that lead back from the canal, and ultimately lead to the far end of this salt line here, actually. So I can do a circuit. The end leads back to the beginning, which isn't purposive, you know, other than the exercise I get, or the exercise that my dog gets, and the exercise that my imagination gets. It hasn't got an extrinsic purpose other than the purpose I give it whilst I'm walking. As I say, it's mostly to do with exercise of one kind or another, and exorcise in other kinds. So I sometimes take these walks and I'm pissed off about something. If I get fed up or unhappy or have a row or anything like that, I tend to take my dogs out for a walk. One of my dogs died. I tend to take Phoebe out for a walk and do this, and do what I read somewhere that the Inuit do. I don't know if it's true or not. The Inuit supposedly have this tradition where if they have an upset, a row, they take themselves out onto the ice, I guess, and just walk in a straight line until their bad feeling has disappeared, until it's melted into the rest of the ice, and then they go back. I kind of do the same. There's no ice here, but there's no ice, but there are bikes. And just walk in this 5 or 6 mile circuit until I feel alright a bit, and then I go home. So it has the exercising capacity as well as the exercising capacity, I guess, this kind of walking. But it is a circular walk, and it's not a purposive walk, and they're really different, I think. really different. Because I'm not, the idea of the purposive walk, or the purposive track, the purposive trail, the purposive journey, the purposive line really, you know, whether that be a, well, I don't know, any kind of a line, a river, a railway line, a road, they have to have terminal points, don't they? You know, they have to have a source, a path and a goal, like in the image scheme I talked about a couple of days ago. They have to have that, otherwise they don't make sense in our minds, you know. The road that goes nowhere is a kind of anomaly in the mind. It's an unfinished project. It doesn't make sense. And I think the same is true for the how we use those things as metaphors. I've been thinking about this in relation to the life thing, because life, as I think I mentioned before, you know, we tend to talk about individual lives as journeys. You know, you go through your individual life as a journey, and that's kind of fine. But when you really put that into a larger picture, when you think about the whole life as a journey, that starts to become a little bit problematic, I think. Particularly if you're not of a religious persuasion. Now, I've mentioned John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress a couple of times, and that's quite an interesting book in that sense. It talks about the life of the Christian, and the life he takes is full of, well, it's not full of pain, but it's full of different things. It's not, he has to go through the valley of the shadow of death. He has to go through the slough of despond. He has to pass through Vanity Fair. You know, he goes through all of these tribulations and temptations. And those things are only really worth going through because he crosses the final river and enters the city of God at the end with the help of the evangelist, I think, if I'm thinking right and say. It only makes sense in that point. You know, the journey becomes meaningful by the fact you've arrived. This road only becomes, this path here, when it was a railway line, is meaningful by the fact that it arrives at the salt works. You know, the ultimate destination almost. And the same is true of that of Pilgrim's Progress, I think. It's meaningful because of its destination. You know, I think some of the existential crises that some Christians perhaps feel with the questioning of their faith, it's the termination, the truncation, the cutting off of that final point. You know, would you really want to walk through the valley of the shadow of death if you weren't going anywhere? No, you probably wouldn't. You'd probably say, actually, you know, I think I'll skip this bit. You know, would you really be able to get to the slough of despond without just collapsing in depression? Would you want to walk through Vanity Fair, or would you rather stay there and be distracted and have yourself as much a good time as you can, given how trivial the occasion is? Just make the best of it. You probably wouldn't want to do any of those things. The only thing that keeps you going is the fact that past that final river is the city of God, the city of celestial whatever. So without that, it is a bit strange. And of course, that's a religious metaphor, religious allegory. But I think the same thing is true in other ways, really. You know, when Darwin came up with the theory of evolution, and that was developed, you know, through various developments since. You know, we might say, oh well, this is rationality and this is reason, and those old metaphors have disappeared. But they haven't really. You know, they're still around. Related ones, isn't the sound of that? You know, they're still absolutely around. You know, so for example, the Dawkins book, A River Out of Eden. Of course, it's just a metaphor, but it's a very powerful metaphor. I've got to show you this horse. They are beautiful, aren't they? Like the Houyhnhnms in Gulliver's Travels that I must talk about at some point. Because that's a journey, isn't it, that one? Anyway, carry on. Come on, peeps. What was I up to with this? Gulliver's Travels, Pilgrim's Progress. Oh, it's all worth it. River Out of Eden, that's right. So Dawkins writes about the River Out of Eden, which on the face of it is a kind of truth. You know, it's this slow passage of, or maybe not so slow passage of genetic information from one body to the next, in which we're just kind of conduits for the flow of DNA, the flow of the genome, and the slow mutation and the meandering of that genome into different areas, and the brachiating of that genome. So it becomes like what are those things called as rivers head towards the ocean? Delta. the deltaing of that genome, so it spreads out into different tributaries and may become species and so on. Wow, that horse is making a lot of noise. But it's the same kind of metaphor, isn't it? You know, it's the idea that these things flow through you. You know, that life is a kind of river that's flowing through the bodies of the people who possess that life. Very poetic. It's every bit as poetic as Rahil Gilbran in The Prophet. He says, you know, let's see if I can get this right, it's a long time since I read this. He says, your children are not your children, they are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but they are not from you, they belong not, and though they are with you, they belong not to you. So this idea that children are embodiments of a life that is passing through them, through you, and will ultimately pass on to your children. You know, it's this river metaphor, almost a river out of Eden. A river out of Eden. Interesting about the descent there, actually. You know, because rivers descend, don't they? They follow the logic of gravity and the meanderings of landscape, always in a downhill direction. And Darwin's talking about that too, the descent of man. It's this flowing down, downwards. River out of Eden, descent of man. I'll have to think about that one. And yeah, we talk about passing it down, don't we? If you have a trait, you pass it down to your children, or it was passed down to you, or even family heirlooms. This beautiful mahogany sideboard was passed down to me by my grandfather. Down, I don't know why. Apart from Jacob Bronowski, in which case it's the ascent of man. I don't know how that happened exactly. So where am I up to? This journey without end. A meandering journey without end. All rivers flow to the sea, is that how it works? You know, in that one, the logic of that isn't religious, of course. You know, there's no religion in Dawkins there. But the poetics that he's mobilising, which is the same poetics as in Gilbran, I think, and you find in other things like the Tower, the Watercourse Way that Alan Watts writes about, is inheriting at least some of the logic of rivers. And if you're inheriting the logic of rivers, then you have to kind of acknowledge that rivers do eventually, even the most tired river does eventually to get to the sea, you know. And that bit of the metaphor is truncated in Dawkins. And it does feel truncated in a way, you know. We want purpose. We want the purpose of dissolution in the oceanic nothingness at the end somehow. I think there's something going on there for us, even though we wouldn't acknowledge it. No, we're not capable of not acknowledging it, because it's just not in the metaphor. Meanders are interesting, aren't they, actually? Because meanders are quite straight, or possibly quite straight, but not always. I remember when I used to do geography at school years ago, we were doing physical geography, geography of valleys and volcanoes and tectonic plates and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that we were talking about was about valleys and how rivers carve valleys. Really fascinating stuff, actually. I really liked it. And one of the things that the teacher did, I can't remember his name now, but he did this great experiment. He's very experimental. Come here. It's keeping my dog away from the other. Good girl. One of the things he did was he wanted to demonstrate how rivers worked. So he got this tray. I guess it was about 3 foot by 18 inches, like a cooking tray, but bigger. I don't know what it was used for. Photography darkroom tray, I think. And he'd filled it with sand, very fine sand. They kind of get in playgrounds. And then using a yardstick, he'd levelled the top off. You know, scraped right across the top. So it was this perfectly smooth bed of sand, about 2 inches deep, in this big tray. Then he put a couple of books under one end. So it was raised about 4 or 5 inches. So it's this slow incline, well, not very slow, but an incline of this perfectly smooth surface of sand. Then he had this beaker of water, and he tipped the beaker up very slowly at the top end, so it just trickled into the. Just demonstrate my miming abilities. You just trickled it into the top end like that. So there's a thin stream of water just finding its way into the top of this little incline, and it started to run down the slope, you know, like that. And you would think, you know, we all predicted that it would just run in a straight line like this, disused railway line. But in fact it doesn't. It does at first, then it just starts to do this. It just starts to make a meander like that. Apparently what's happening is that tiny differences in the, I wouldn't call them imperfections, but just differences in the individual grains of sand combined with just the way that atomic forces work, you know, akin to Brownian motion, just those kind of differences and those kinds of forces are enough to make little changes, chaotic changes, literally chaotic changes in this smooth path. And as it proceeds, those little changes are magnified by the substrate that it's in. So what you get is this meander like this. You know, you don't get a straight line, you get a drunkard's walk, as I think it's called. Fascinating. It's a chaos with a strange attractor. You know, all the rivers do eventually get to the sea. The little trickle of water does eventually get to the bottom of the tray. But if you do it 1,000 times, it won't do it the same way twice. You can't, or you cannot step into the same river twice. You can't make the same river twice. But I guess if you aggregated all those, you know, if you averaged out all those journeys, sure enough, you would get this smart, soldierly march of time down there. You know, the smart railway line, the Roman road, the M6 would sure enough cut down that sound if you aggregated it. And in some ways that would be the wisest path for the water to take if it really wanted to get somewhere. And if the only place it's going is the end of a disused railway line, or to a metaphorical ocean at the end of a river out of Eden, which didn't exist in the first place, then perhaps it makes more sense to focus on the individual meander rather than try to aggregate them into the journey. Don't worry about the river's destination, think about the river's running, like the river that runs through Finnegan's Wake. James Joyce's book, Finnegan's Wake, begins with the word river run, all one word, R-I-V-E-R-R-U-N, portmanteau word, river run, great word. River run past Eve and Adams, which is supposed to be a pub in Dublin, but of course it's also Eden, isn't it? So it's a river out of Eden, and right in the beginning of that. But the difference in that one, actually some really interesting things about that. He's talked about river run past Eve of Adams, and then Commodius Vicus he mentions in this first line. Commodius Vicus. The reference to Vicus in that first sentence is a reference to Vico. Giambattista Vico, I think he is. Italian writer, who had this theory about cyclical time, that time wasn't a river that starts in Eden and ends in Armageddon, or starts in Eden and ends in heaven. It's a circle. That's how Vico imagined it. And that's also in Finnegan's Wake, because the last sentence in Finnegan's Wake is the first part of the first sentence. You can read on from the last part of the sentence in Finnegan's Wake, and it continues into the sentence that begins river run of Eve of Adams, the first sentence. You know, so the whole book forms a circle, interestingly. River run is also a play on the word reverie, I think, which is the first word in one of Vico's books. Reverie is about dream and imagination. Yeah, so this little circular path I'm on now, it was a straight path about this, which took salt to and from saltworks, ceramics factory, but now it truncates. I joined up to a little road, just a path through and joined the canal, which also was quite a straight track that used to take the ceramics to the port of Liverpool, where they're sent around the world, and now it's just for leisure cruises really. But I walk up that, and then I cut up and go back to where I started from. There's no river up there, of course, but I do a Commodius Vicus all the way around. Come on, Fees, we're not going to turn around and go back. There's no going back. There's no going back. Come on, let's meander this way. Off she goes. Follow the dog. Wherever you're stuck, wherever you're lost, follow the dog.